On the morning of the fight, it was apparent that any concern over the weight had been misplaced. Tommy removed his outer garments, but he stepped on the scale, still wearing a pair of blue terry cloth shorts and a formidable gold chain, and weighed in at 162.5, 5.5 pounds, under the divisional limit. Had Hearns weighed in excess of 164, he would have incurred financial penalties. Now people were wondering whether he should be entitled to a refund. Leonard removed his Franklin Sports warm-up suit, but retained a pair of black bathing trunks and a green, black and red tank top with the legend Free South Africa in gold letters across the top. Leonard weighed 160, 5 pounds less than he had for Lalonde. As Nevada's senior and most prominent referee, Mills Lane had been expected to draw the Leonard Hearns 2 assignment, but Lane had encountered such difficulty trying to pry Hearns loose from Kinchin that the Nevada State Athletic Commission guarded against a repetition by appointing the larger and stronger Richard Steele. None of the three blind mice who had worked the 1981 fight were on the panel of judges for the rematch. Minka and Ford had been promoted to supervisory positions. Nevadans Dalby Shirley and Jerry Ruff were named to the tribunal, with New Jersey's Tom Kazmarek occupying the third seat. The question of a post-fight steroid test never came up at the rules meeting, even though the commission seemed prepared to order one had either side requested it. The subject was never brought up, shrugged Miller. Emmanuel Stewart knows how to ask, despite Emmanuel Stewart and Tommy's accusations earlier. With the fight scheduled for the off day between games 3 and 4 of what would be a Detroit sweep in the 1989 NBA Finals, Michael G. was shuttling between Vegas and Los Angeles on his Monday morning return from LAX. Pat Morita, Olivia Newton-John, and Kathy Lee Crosby were all on the same flight. Pistons coach Chuck Daly also dashed over from LA on Monday, presumably to root for the Hitman. I'm just looking for a knockout punch, Daly, whose team would score one of its own the following evening, told G. Michael Carbajal faced Eduardo Nunes in the fourth bout of the evening. These type of fights, so early in the program, the only people to watch the fights were the 300 or so gambling addicts who had bet on them. Anyway, the action in the first three fights consisted entirely of each man attempting to maneuver his opponent into the east side of the ring, where he'd be blinded by the sun. It made for some pretty weird-looking fights. The first two bouts of the evening showcased a couple of Leonard proteges, Canadian middleweight Dan Sherry and light heavyweight Andrew Maynard, the 1988 Olympic gold medalist. They both registered TKOs over John Tunstall and Stephen Schwarn. The third fight saw Ray Mercer, the former Army sergeant who had won the heavyweight gold in Seoul. He won his sixth pro fight by knocking out Ken Crosby. Carbajal, a future boxing Hall of Famer, stopped Nunes in 4, while another future world champion, a Mexican lightweight named Manny Medina, scored a fifth-round TKO over George Cazares. The other two prelims saw a pair of Aaron-promoted Tarkanian-backed boxers with 6-round decisions. Robert Wangila barely edged out veteran Buck Smith, and Kennedy McKinney outpointed David Moreno. Celebrities were periodically introduced from the ring. Chuck Daly got the biggest round of applause, presumably from the Motown fans, and then only wrote Michael G. after a photo finish with Kirk Douglas. G noted that because this was a carefully crafted promotion, there was a celebrity for everybody's taste. Nobody made a sound when George Peppard was introduced. Saddest of all was Hollywood Squares host John Davidson, who was roundly booed. Also in the audience that night were Don Rickles and Jerry Lewis, Tom Selleck, Mr. T, Dionne Warwick, Ed Mirinaro, Lou Gossett, and Barry Switzer. And while no Pistons or Lakers players joined Daly at ringside, a number of NBA stars from non-competing teams were in attendance. Michael Jordan, Charles Barkley, David Robinson, and Chris Mullin. The Pointer Sisters were also seated at ringside, and just before the main event, they performed the national anthem. In keeping with the socially conscious Free South Africa theme Leonard had initiated at the weigh-in, Ray made his ring entrance wearing a red and white robe with a single word, Amandla, written across the back, a Zulu term meaning power. It had been adopted as a slogan in anti-apartheid demonstrations. Once he shed the robe, the waistband of his red and white candy-striped trunks bore the same legend. Hearns was attired in the Kronk gold, like he had worn against DURAN and HAGLER. Both he and Leonard had worn white trunks in 1981. Once the bell rang, noted Pat Putnam, neither seemed in a hurry to earn his astronomical payday. Hearns' dominant weapon, figured to be his jab, repeatedly came up short with it, noted Putnam, as though fearful of exposing a chin that had failed one recent test and barely survived two others. From the time the fight was announced, most writers were saying that Hearns was shot and that he shouldn't fight and that he might get hurt, remembered Leonard. Throughout the training camp, people kept telling me the same thing. I kept telling them that Tommy would rise to the occasion because he was fighting me. Midway through the third round, Leonard, who had been rather indifferently chipping away at Hearns without significant effect, lowered his head and moved inside to throw a two-punch combination to the midsection. Hearns responded with a short right that stopped Leonard in his tracks and followed it by slamming another right to the side of the head. As the crowd gasped, Leonard tumbled to the canvas. More embarrassed than hurt, he bounced to his feet, assured Richard Steele he was all right, and endured a mandatory 8 count. Hearns chased Leonard around the ring for the remaining half of the round, but Ray survived without further damage and recovered sufficiently to win the next round. In the fifth, Leonard rocked Hearns with a right to the head and a hook to the chin. Hearns staggered backwards until he came to rest against the ropes, which he used to steady himself as he endured Leonard's onslaught. For a solid minute, Leonard flailed away at his wounded quarry, read my account of round 5 in the next morning's Boston Herald. During this episode, he hit Hearns with everything but the ring post, but failed to put him down. Towards the end of the round, Leonard appeared to be taking control, as Hearns looked to have punched himself out. When Hearns staggered back to his corner after the rounds, Stewart told him, "This is what makes a great champion." Leonard seemed to have edged his way into control, but in the 7th, Hearns jolted him again, this time with a right hand. In the 9th, Hearns was cautioned by Steele for a low blow, which made Leonard deliver his own warning, a shot that was patently aimed below the belt, but not at a critical spot. Although a right from Leonard opened a cut below Hearns' right eye in the 9th, Citro's quick work in the corner between rounds minimized the damage, and in the 11th, Hearns stunned Leonard with a huge overhand right. Leonard went scurrying towards the neutral corner, with Tommy in pursuit. When he caught up with Ray, 2 hammering rights and a left put Leonard on the floor again. This time the bell saved Leonard. "He was dead," said Hearns, "but you know what? He came back. I didn't think he had such a great heart." After suffering 2 knockdowns, Leonard said, "I don't know what the judges were thinking. I figured I'd better give them something else to think about." Leonard produced a massive 12th round, battering Hearns all around the ring. A plainly relieved Hearns managed to smile at the final bell, revealing a blood-drenched gum shield. Tom Kazmarek scored it 112-113. Dalby Shirley had it 112-112, and Jerry Roth had it 113-112. A draw. The fight was a draw. There were predictable cries of robbery and worse from the crowd, but not from either of the competitors. Allowed that he was very pleased with the outcome. Hearns believed he had won. He then shrugged and said, "I guess the judges saw it differently." He was hardly the picture of outrage. Dalby Shirley scored the 5th round 10-8 despite the absence of a knockdown, which is absolutely ridiculous in my opinion. The 12th, perhaps you could score 10-8 to Leonard, even in the absence of a knockdown, but not the 5th. When questioned about a rematch, Leonard said, "I want to go back, relax and think." He said he needs to look at the film. Another school of thought amongst the observers was that this would be the perfectly appropriate moment for both men to retire. Leonard and Hearns were mutually gracious when they jointly met with the press the following morning. "Tommy came into the fight seeking redemption," said Leonard, "and he got that." Hearns said he woke up and his mind was clear. He was laying in his bed thinking, "I wonder who Ray's thinking about this morning. I still love this man," added Tommy. Leonard diplomatically replied when asked if he thought he won the fight, "I think we both showed what we were made of." The sports books, which had been under siege from people betting on Hearns in the hours before the fights, were even more relieved than Sugar Ray by the outcome. Although the result was a push, refunding winning bets on both fighters was a small price to pay compared to the bath they would have taken had the verdict gone to Hearns. As it turned out, many of those refunds were never collected anyway. Thousands of boxing fans believed their bets on Leonard and Hearns had been lost. They discarded their betting slips that night. That proved to be a windfall for the Caesars clean-up crew. The next morning, the Stoopers made a fortune.